is a land of incredible diversity, history, and culture. Throughout the centuries, numerous religious traditions have coexisted. In this program, we'll explore two of the great religious traditions of India, Hinduism and Buddhism. We'll see how Hindu and Buddhist beliefs are practiced and made visible through architecture, sculpture, and painting.
Hinduism may be described as a museum of religions because you have every conceivable perspective. You may be a follower of yoga and you may be a Hindu. You may believe in a personal God or you may believe in an impersonal absolute. There is a wide variety of choices, you know.
What we are confronted by in India is variety of images representing numerous deities, and they are all the gods in one way or another come from the same entity or idea, which is sometimes called Brahman, sometimes is called the reality, sometimes called truth, but these are just different manifestations.
You know, there is this concept that we tend to categorize that religion must have only one deity, but this concept of many in one is something that the Hindu accepts right from the beginning.
The different forms of Hindu gods arise to meet different needs, and it comes out of Hindu mythology as well, where you'll see gods emerging in different forms to defeat certain demons. The most frequently represented deities that you'll find are probably the great gods of Hinduism, and these are Shiva and Vishnu, and the goddess will be represented in various forms.
The way to recognize many of these deities is via their attributes, and very often the Hindu deities are represented with multiple arms and multiple heads, and they primarily represent the aspect of the divine majesty of the gods and their superhuman qualities.
The god Shiva can take many forms. He can appear as a ferocious figure, or he can also be depicted as a family man. While Shiva has dreadlocks, and often he's shown with a third eye on his forehead, and he often carries the trident.
He's always shown his body smeared with ashes and his hair are unkempt and disheveled and wearing a garland of cobras.
He is represented as the great yogi and the great teacher. Shiva may be represented in his symbolic forms such as the linga or the phallus. The linga represents the creative power. You would recognize that a temple is dedicated to Shiva by the image of the linga that you would see in the temple sanctuary.
And here we have got a very interesting object called Tripura Antaka, that means the victory over the three cities. And Shiva is shown here as an archer in his victorious pose. The legend tells us that by performing severe austerities, three demon brothers received a gift of powers so that they can build three indestructible cities, one of gold in the heavens, one of silver in the sky, and one of iron in the earth. Thinking themselves invincible, they ravaged both God and man. But there was a stipulation that once in 1,000 years, the three cities would join to become one, and then it would be possible to destroy them if pierced by a single arrow. So the man and God petitioned Shiva, and when the three cities became united, he discharged his mighty arrow and destroyed the cities, thus rescuing the world from the evil tyranny.
Now Ganesh is the son of Shiva and Parvati. He is worshipped all over India, and he is the remover of obstacles and the god of good fortune. You recognize him by his elephant head, and there is an interesting myth that tells us how he got his elephant head. Parvati is alone, feeling dejected and lonely. Shiva, as you know, is the wild yogi, the ascetic who disappeared into the mountains for eons. So Parvati decides to fashion a clay image of Ganesh and breathes life into him. And lovingly, she raised him. One day, before she went into bathe, she asked Ganesh to guard the entrance to the house. And as luck would have it, Shiva returns from one of his meditation trips and finds Ganesh barring entry into his own home. Shiva doesn't recognize who Ganesh is, and Ganesh has never seen his father before, and so in his rage, Shiva decides to chop off Ganesh's head. Parvati, when she realizes what has happened, is horrified and asks Shiva to restore Ganesh. So Shiva, realizing what happened, walks out onto the street and grabs the head of the first creature that he sees, which happens to be an elephant. And so he decides to replace Ganesh's head with that of an elephant. And here we have a wonderful 13th century stone sculpture of Ganesh. You can see it is ornately carved, and he holds his many attributes in his four hands. In his upper right hand, he holds an axe. In his lower right hand, he carries a broken tusk, and in his lower left hand, he holds a bowl of sweetmeats. And you can see from his rotund belly that he is very fond of eating, and it is tied with a cobra to prevent it from bursting.
Vishnu's traditional role in Hinduism is as the preserver of the universe. As the world passes through cycle after cycle, he keeps an observant eye on what's going on, and he assumes these avatars as a way to descend down to earth and intercede when there is a crisis.
Vishnu's incarnations include the popular forms of Rama and Krishna, but they also include half animal, half human forms such as Varaha and Narasimha.
The people still choose one deity that they feel are more comfortable with. In my family, it was Krishna, which is the incarnation of Vishnu. Krishna is usually represented by stories, so you can see him playing flute, and maybe he is also shown with cows and maybe the cow herdesses.
Krishna's life story was a very popular subject for manuscripts in India, and we see a number of painted versions of his life. And many of these scenes will depict him demonstrating his strength. And this is something that he demonstrates from the time he's an infant through adulthood. Krishna in many of these paintings is blue in color, is a reference to his name, because Krishna means the dark one. And this dark color is an aspect that's associated with Vishnu. It represents infinity and eternity.
There was a snake, a serpent called Kaliya, and he had become very powerful, and he used to hiss and frighten the people who lived on the banks of the Yamuna river. And the people were afraid to go for their bath in the river. So Krishna was a mere boy at that time. So he climbed a tree on the bank of the river, and from there he jumped on the head of the serpent and performed a dance there, subdued him. And then the serpent begged for mercy. And the serpent's wives came and pleaded with Krishna to let him go, not destroy him. So Krishna said, well, it's not very nice to frighten people like that. Go and live peacefully somewhere else. Do not bother us here.
All Hindu deities are associated with their animal mounts. And we have the goddess Durga, who rides astride a lion or a tiger in her attempt to vanquish evil and suppress the demon Mahisha.
There are many female goddesses, but Durga is highly revered in Bengal. And Bengalis all over India, even if they're away from their homes, come the month of October, when it is time for Durga Puja or the festival of the goddess Durga, there will be 10 days of celebration, and there will be a statue with clay on a superstructure of straw.
The image is dressed in beautiful saris, and there are flowers offered and so on and so forth. Then it is put on a pedestal, and often there is a procession of the goddess.
The moment that we see in the statue invariably is that Durga mounting or standing on a lion. Often there is a human figure emerging whose chest has been pierced by this trident held in Durga's one of her hands, one of her 10 hands. And if you look closely, you will find she invariably has a kind of a beatific smile on her face. She is doing it as an act where justice must prevail over injustice, where righteousness must prevail over wrongdoing.
She would be eventually taken to the river, say the Ganges river, and immersed in the holy waters. The idea of immersion represents the idea of dissolution, implying the idea of becoming one with the universe. So as the image arises from clay, or from unfired clay, it returns to Mother Earth when it is immersed in the holy waters.
It's not unusual to find grown people crying, really, really grieving, and they will be kind of beseeching the mother to come back again next year.
A Hindu temple is a home for the deity and a sacred space where the worshipper can encounter the divine. temples may vary from small forest shrines to very sophisticated ones with elaborate craftsmanship, and they have evolved over centuries to accommodate the growing pantheon of Hindu deities.
Many people circumambulate. They walk around it as a show of piety. And as you circumambulate the temple, you'll see that there is sculpture placed on the walls. You might see Ganesha, for instance. The figure is placed earliest in the circumambulation because his traditional role is as a remover of obstacles. So he would be removing any obstacles to the pious person and his religious goals.
The temple is centered on a sanctuary, which is the innermost part of the temple, a cave-like interior, which we also call the womb chamber. And there is generally a superstructure over the womb chamber, but the womb chamber then opens into a hall, which may be a gathering place. Very often these are pillared halls, and then they lead out to open porches.
In the inner sanctum, you would see the image of the main deity to whom the temple is dedicated.
The primary icon or the image is way deep into the very dark corner of the temple. You can hardly see because only you can see through the candle lights or the flames that are fluttering.
It's like entering a cave in a mountain. And the Hindu temple is most often likened to a mountain. And mountains have a great deal of symbolism, not just in India, but in other countries as well. And the reason for that is because the mountain is the world axis. It connects the heaven and the earth. And it's for this reason that this dark inner chamber of a temple is so much like a dark cave.
One of the most elaborate temples ever produced in India is Kailashnath. It is dedicated to Lord Shiva, drawing its name from the abode of Shiva, which is Mount Kailash in the Himalayas. The whole temple was cut from the natural rock cliffs at Ellora. It looks like a freestanding temple, but everything you see here was carved from the rock, from the top to the bottom.
It's like entering the womb of the earth when you enter a rock-cut temple. Deep inside, you feel that sanctity, that this is where the life sustains itself. I would imagine that is what it was intended. That when you go into one of those rock-cut or cave temples, this is what you feel.
See, in Indian art, architecture and sculpture are inseparable. There are no freestanding sculptures in India except a few bronzes. Otherwise, all sculpture is a part of the architecture. That is why the figure never really completely emerges from the wall or the column.
This can especially be seen in the temples in central India at Khajuraho, which emerged in the 10th and 11th centuries and adorned with sensual sculptures of loving couples we call Mithuna. There are many interpretations of the meaning of these carvings.
The symbolism here is that the union of the male and the female is a symbol of the union of the individual soul with the Supreme Soul. You know, you go round the temple from the outside and you see the world of material reality and worldly pleasures. And then you transcend them when you go down into the Garbhagriha or the main sanctuary, the Sanctum Sanctorum, and you realize that these were merely appearances. The reality is inside.
We have the wonderful ornamental temple at Konarak in eastern India, in Orissa, and here the whole temple is conceived as a sky chariot, as the chariot of the god Surya, the sun god, equipped with horses and standing on elaborate wheels, elaborately carved wheels. What actually survives today is only part of the original temple, which used to have a much taller tower. In southern India, at Madurai, are huge gopuras or gateways that tower above the temple complex. These gateways are filled with statues of the deities. During elaborate festivals, the enshrined bronze statues of the Lord Shiva and the goddess Meenakshi are carried before the public in a procession of chariots.
Being Indian and having traveled to India so many times, I never really considered all of the art that I saw in the pilgrimage temples that I would visit with my parents as art. It was just part of the whole temple fabric.
We don't have a concept of going to a temple on a particular day of the week. Unlike, say, the Christians go to church on Sundays. You could go any day or not go at all.
There is no idea of a Hindu sermon where people have to congregate.
Because in Hinduism there is no particular time that you go to the temple. You can go if you have an exam, you can go before you give the exam and pray for good grades. Or you can for a marriage or so many other, whatever reason it is. Before the temple you'll see many stalls which should be selling different items that you may need before to worship and pray, like flowers, incense, coconut, their powder, and so forth.
They will go barefoot into the temple. There is a bell, they will probably ring once, seeking the permission of the god to, may I now enter your temple.
Priests generally play the role of ritual specialists. They're trained in Sanskrit texts, in offering prayers, and in making sure that the ritual is performed in the correct way.
And all offerings to the god are channelized through him. So invariably he will recite some incantations, which is the word which has already come into the English language now, called mantra. And the person who is making the offering, his name will be introduced somewhere in this process of incantation. And well, you earn some merit on account of that. Maybe the gods will smile upon you.
Each person tries to have a darshan, what we call, or this eye contact with the deity, because it is felt that looking personally or into the eyes of the deity, you can get the energy and the blessing directly from that particular statue.
Hindu worship can also involve the lighting of fire and offering these lit lamps to the god embodied in the sculpture.
One of the most important rituals in worship is the performing of the Arati. Now this Arati comprises of lighting a lamp, placing it in a flat tray, and then waving the tray and the flame around the deity, thus honoring the deity with light. By placing their hands over the flame and touching their eyelids with the fingertips, thereby absorbing the divine presence.
Because the deity is believed to be present in the image, and then the worshiper honors him with flowers, with incense, gifts of food, and treats him like an honored guest.
The idea is you must not always possess, you must also give up. So if you give up, if you give flowers or honey or whatever, milk, it's a gesture of saying, well, now I'm surrendering to, these are things that I'm giving, It's not that I'm only taking, I must give.
Rivers in India are sacred, especially the Ganges River. And Varanasi, located on its banks, is like a huge shrine to Shiva with no fewer than 2,000 temples. They say that just to live in Varanasi is sacred.
And all these are considered sacred spots and for pilgrimage, because according to the legends and the sacred texts, gods have visited them, have been there.
Well, there are many ghats, that is to say, paved stones, steps leading to the river. And each has some historical association and some religious association.
Devotees immerse themselves in the water, facing the rising sun and chanting mantras to the sun god Surya.
When you have become disenchanted with the world and you have a sense of futility, then you pass your last days on the bank of the holy river in a sacred city, waiting for the last moment to come.
The very elderly come to Varanasi to die in the hope of achieving liberation and peace, a release from the cycle of rebirths. The dead are cremated along the river banks and their ashes strewn across the river to become one with the goddess and one with the universe.